When looking at the hundreds of hours of television that the WWE produced over the years, there's bound to be a few shows that may often get overlooked or forgotten in comparison to the others, especially when it comes to all their weekend programming. For every wrestling challenge, superstars, and even a long-lasting program like Raw, you'll often find 2 or 3 times the amount of a lower-level show that often aired on a Saturday or Sunday, that would have such a short amount of airtime that you would either be rebranded as another recap show with a fresh coat of paint, or just be completely replaced with a new show that would often try and tie in a new innovative concept within the world of professional wrestling. The most likely reason as to why WWE doesn't acknowledge or even add this missing content onto the network and Peacock services is more likely due to the feeling that those shows, even if they had some hidden gem-worthy matches or segments, don't have enough significance, or in some cases public reception, to justify adding them for subscribers to watch whenever they wish to. And because of the company's lack of care for providing access to all of their available content in their video vault, it means the only way these obscure shows can even be remembered or acknowledged are through means such as uploads of VHS recordings, mentions in articles or message boards, or in an instance like this, online videos that cover their history as much as possible. This video is going to be a spotlight to some of these obscure WWF programs that you may recall seeing on a Saturday or Sunday at one point or another throughout the 90s. And at first they may not seem important on the surface, but looking into their history can reveal some hidden matches, important moments, or even some backstory as to why some of these shows either changed during their initial airing, or just came to a complete end. With that all said, let's take a look at the WWF's forgotten weekend shows. WWF Mania was the first recap show to air on Saturday mornings on the USA Network, debuting on January 9, 1993. The show was hosted by Todd Pettengill, who made his debut for the Federation when Mania went on the air. He would later be joined by co-hosts such as the Macho Man Randy Savage and later Stephanie Wyant. Todd would introduce what would be featured for that week's episode, while also doing some skits or impressions every now and then.
What are you going to see this morning? Good question. Fair. It's a new show. Let me tell you, everything that's hot in the world of wrestling will be covered on this show every Saturday morning at 10. What else are you going to watch? Reruns of Taxi?
Okay, doc. Hey, Alex, I'm watching WWF.
Hey, where's the rug? There was supposed to be a red rug in here. I would not have worn the boots if there wasn't going to be the rug. Now, I can't wear the boots. The boots do not work at all if there's not a rug. We're continuing, ladies and gentlemen.
Episodes would feature recaps of what took place on all the major shows, while also having an exclusive match that was taped just for Mania. Mania had a few special episodes during its run, including an entire episode covering the 1994 Slammy Awards, and in 1996, Sunny would host the show for a week, with the company even going as far as to have it be named The Sunny Show. The final episode of Mania aired on September 14, 1996, as the show would be spun off into WWF Blastoff and air exclusively on the WGN Superstation. And while it kept the same format as Mania, it wouldn't last for long as Blastoff would be off the air by the end of 1996. Mania itself would get completely replaced in its Saturday morning time slot with a new program called Livewire.
That's right. Next week right here, the program is called Livewire. 10 a.m., 9 Central. You're going to see it. It's going to revolutionize television. You can call us on the telephone live. You can fax us live. Faxes are pouring in all over. People want to know what's up with the show. The show is called Livewire. You could call us and talk to us totally live, or if you have America Online, email us. It's that simple. We'll read it. We'll respond to you. It's going to be absolutely cool. It's totally live right here where this program normally airs. Livewire, next week, 10 a.m., 9 Central. Wasn't there enough?
WWF Action Zone began airing Sunday afternoons on October 23, 1994, and featured matches that were taped exclusively for the show. Charlie Min co-hosted the show and went off to be seen at ringside when the superstars passed by him on the ramp, while Vince McMahon and Todd Pettengill provided commentary for the first 3 episodes until Vince would be replaced by Jim Ross, with Gorilla Monsoon occasionally appearing to fill in for JR. The first 2 episodes of the show featured major championship bouts, including Bret Hart defeating Owen to retain the WWF title in what was billed as Owen's last chance to win the gold, while the following week featured Shawn Michaels and Diesel defending the tag team titles against fellow clickmates Razor Ramon and the 1-2-3 Kid. Action Zone continued to feature exclusive matches until the end of 1995, when it was turned into another recap show that would be hosted by Pettengill and Doc Hendricks. The final episode aired on September 15, 1996, as Action Zone would be replaced with WWF Superstars, the company's other weekly in-ring program that had previously aired through syndication, but would now exclusively air on the USA Network. Sunday Night Slam originally began as a series of 2-hour specials that aired on the USA Network to help promote the Federation's major pay-per-views, with the first special airing August 21, 1994 prior to SummerSlam, November 20th, 1994 prior to Survivor Series, and on March 26, 1995 prior to WrestleMania 11. The matches for these specials would take place during Raw tapings, with some pre-taped and studio segments thrown in to help continue the ongoing storylines. The format would be changed in 1995 and would now act as the company's first pre-show that would air 30 minutes prior to all the big events, with the final episode airing on December 17, 1995 prior to the In Your House Season's Beatings pay-per-view. A month later, the show would be moved over to pay-per-view provider channels such as the Preview channel. While the show itself would have a complete rebrand, it would now be called The Free-For-All. And in 1998, the format for The Free-For-All would be completely changed once again, as with the company's new program Sunday Night Heat being treated as its new pre-show that would take place on the USA Network, Free-For-All would be changed as an exclusive preview show, with interviews and video packages shown to help build up all the major matches to take place on the occasional pay-per-view. Super Astros was the Federation's Spanish-language show that featured Mexican wrestlers competing against each other as well as lower-card wrestlers in the company on weekly television, with its debut taking place on November 22, 1998 on the free-to-air network Univision.
Esta es KMX Televisión Canal 34, Los Ángeles.
And was hosted by Marcelo Rodriguez, who's gone on to be a staple of the company's Spanish programming and color commentary since hosting the show. Maria Felipe would serve as the backstage interviewer, and the matches would be called via the company's Spanish announce team, Carlos Cabrera and Hugo Savinovich. Some of the stars regularly featured on Astros include Papi Chulo, who would later be featured on WWF programming as S.A. Rios, all the members of the Los Boricuas stable including Savio Vega, Huracan Castillo Jr., Jose Estrada, and Miguel Perez, Super Loco, who would eventually be featured in ECW as Super Crazy, as well as all the mini wrestlers, including Max Mini and Mascarita Sagrada, who was repackaged for the show as Mini Nova. The show would have its own ongoing storylines and stables involving groups from both the AAA and CMLL promotions, who would compete against each other in a mix of singles and multi-man tag matches. Besides the in-ring matches, Astros also featured highlights of Raw, whether it be brief recaps or replays of major matches with Spanish commentary dubbed over. The final episode of Astros would air on September 5th, 1999. And the apparent story that I could find as to what led to the show's cancellation is quite fascinating. As the story goes, Univision ended up being disappointed with the show pulling in more North American viewers in their male demographic compared to the Latin market that they were aiming for, in spite of the show pulling in high ratings for the network. Ultimately, even after Vince McMahon offered to extend the show from 30 minutes to an hour-long program, they rejected the offer, and after both sides went their separate ways, Super Astros would be pulled off the air. Jakked and Metal were syndicated shows for the WWF that began airing on September 4th, 1999. Metal would air in the afternoons and was more kid-friendly, while Jakked aired on Saturday nights and would maintain the edginess of the company's regular programming. The matches for each show would be taped prior to Raw and feature a mix of established undercard talent competed against each other, with some squash matches thrown in against local enhancement talent, though both shows would air the same matches in separate orders and have separate commentary teams. Arguably the most memorable match from Jakked and Metal's run, for unfortunate reasons, took place on the May 12, 2001 episode when Perry Saturn took on Mike Bell. This was the infamous match where after some miscommunication between the two would lead to Bell performing a somewhat sloppy hip toss onto him, Saturn got set off by this and began to work stiff against Mike. Perry would end up throwing Mike out of the ring hard enough for him to land head first onto the ringside mats. Thankfully, Terry Runnels at ringside helped calm Perry down and would also help roll Mike out of the ring and away from Saturn after the match had ended. After the brand extension went into effect in 2002, matches on the shows would feature exclusively lower card talent from SmackDown. The final episodes of Jakked and Metal took place on May 18, 2002, and both shows would get replaced in syndication with Bottom Line and Afterburn. Bottom Line being a recap show for Raw, and Afterburn being a recap show for SmackDown. Access was a WWF's attempt to revive the original format of a fan interaction program. The show premiered on August 25, 2001, replacing both Livewire and Superstars, and would air from 10 p.m. to midnight on Saturdays as a part of TNN's slamming Saturday night lineup of programming. The show emanated from the company's TV studios in Connecticut, with the hosts originally being Jonathan Coachman and Trish Stratus, although by the end of the year, Trish would be replaced by Terry Runnels. While Access did have its weekly highlights from both Raw and SmackDown, fans also got to interact with their favorite superstars who would be in the studio that week, asking them questions through emails and phone calls, and would also be able to request classic matches to be aired as a part of the From the Vault segment. The show would go through a format change by April of 2002, as with the previously mentioned brand split now in effect, Access had been split into two separate recap shows within the 2-hour time slot. The first hour would be hosted by Michael Cole and Mark Lloyd, covering all the action from SmackDown, while the second hour, dubbed Late Night Access, was hosted by The Coach and Raven as they looked at what happened on Raw. This new format for Access wouldn't last long, as a month later, the time slot for the show would be replaced with two new programs. Velocity, which was an hour-long in-ring program that usually featured talent from SmackDown, and WWE Confidential, a magazine-style show that would focus on topics both in and out of the ring with various superstars. Whether it be because of the WWF's concept of fan interactive shows now being intriguing enough, because of the changes to the format later on, or simply because of the bad time slot, Access did not gain as much popularity as the company or TNN were hoping for, and it would hold the unfortunate honor of being named the Wrestling Observer Newsletter's worst television show in 2001. What's arguably the most disappointing thing about Access from an historical standpoint isn't necessarily about the show itself or any particular segment that aired, but more about what Access could have originally been. Had things worked out differently and in favor for both the WWF and TNN, those 2 hours on Saturday nights would have featured a show that had far more significance and importance, and arguably could have led to some more intrigue for a particular storyline that they were building to. After the WCW buyout earlier in 2001, and with plans on keeping it as its own separate brand within the Federation, Vince McMahon and TNN would negotiate on the possibility of getting WCW its own 2-hour show on Saturday nights. However, Viacom, the parent company for TNN, wasn't interested in carrying 2 additional hours of Vince's wrestling, and after further negotiations to get WCW its own show fell flat, all plans for the inevitable Invasion storyline would be changed. And all the while, the company still had 2 hours of a late-night time slot show to fill in, and thus Access would end up taking its spot. And with that, I hope you enjoyed a look back at some of the obscure entries into the WWF's weekend programming. Some of these shows span throughout the different eras of the company, from the New Generation, through the Attitude Era, and even the very beginning of the Ruthless Aggression Era. And considering the range of broadcasts that these shows often had, whether they be through cable networks or through various means of syndication, hopefully watching through this video brought back some memories of you recalling some of these shows when they initially aired, and being fond about some of the matches or particular characters that you first saw during these programs. And it's always important to bring awareness to these types of shows, since WWE themselves don't feel very inclined on adding any of these programs onto their streaming services anytime soon. But as somebody who enjoys watching lost media content be found and or preserved on major platforms, I do have some small hope that WWE themselves eventually decide to add all these shows onto the network and Peacock services for people to be able to watch for the first time in the best quality possible. Because regardless of how well produced or well received these shows ended up being, there's still pieces of content that often reflect different eras of the company's history. And as fun as they are on celebrating said past while cashing in on the nostalgia that comes along with it, hopefully they also consider some of the small footnotes, no matter how short-lived they were, to be a part of that celebrated history.